This film was made as part of the Common Cause Research Project, which aims to understand how universities and Black and minority ethnic communities build collaborations. Each of these films tells a different story of how these collaborations might work. They range from long-term partnerships to short-term projects and events. The films are designed to prompt discussion and reflection. We encourage you to ask, what questions might be learned for the future from these stories?
Vernacular Religion, understanding how Nepalis living in the UK
have recreated their communities and religion in diaspora. My field is basically multidisciplinary. I did my PhD in development studies, partly sociology, so yes, I'm a social scientist, I would like to say.
I'm a specialist on South Asia, and my main field site is Nepal, and I've been going there for over 40 years. And I've done many studies of different topics, primarily religion, ethnicity, politics, that kind of thing. One thing I never ever imagined in my wildest dreams when I was first studying Nepal in the early 1980s was that so many Nepalis would end up in my own country.
Since 2006, there has been a huge rise in the number of Nepalese living in UK, particularly thanks to the British government policy to allow some of the Gorkhas to settle here.
So in 2008, in fact even before that, 2007, before I became head of department, and in fact before I was in my current job, the Centre for Nepal Studies UK got in touch.
Centre for Nepal Studies UK had actually carried out a big community research through voluntary process. About 200 community members and organizations participated in a population census.
They were trying to establish how many Nepalis there are in the UK.
So we were contacting people, academics, who were doing research in Nepal. So David was one of them.
We weren't able to sponsor their self-research straight away in any kind of way, but we became partners. Later that year, a colleague of mine in religious studies, Sandra Hausner, who's also a Nepal specialist, and I were sort of devising a project which we wanted to pitch to the jointly funded AHRC, ESRC Religion and Society program, which was giving out these big grants. And the project was this Vernacular Religion project.
So there was interest to understand how a set of practices that people do in Nepal is basically, whether that is replicated, transferred to the new place where people try to build community. The research had two different ways of collecting data. One qualitative, which is interviewing people, observing their activities, participating in their events. Quantitative data is more about numbers.
We had 300 households with a detailed survey, which was then put into a computer and analysed using SPSS.
So what we did was that from that big data set, we stratified people by their categories like caste and ethnicity.
This percentage of Nepalis are Buddhist, and this percentage are Hindu, and this percentage are Hindu and Buddhist, and that kind of thing. We've written a lot about that in our results. What was a joy? The Limbus have a particular reformist religious tradition called Satyahangma, and Balgopal and I drove off to Swindon to attend one of their rituals held in Coates Park, Swindon, the last place in the world where you would imagine an exotic Nepalese ritual being held. And they were doing this, a fire sacrifice ritual, and they were all dressed in their white robes. It was extraordinary.
So we were interested to have observation of people's shrine, whether they have shrine at home, and if they do, whether we were allowed to go into shrine, collect what objects they have, and also ask people about what regular religious or other related activities they do.
So there was a lot of testing, a lot of piloting, a lot of discussions ahead of time about what kind of questions you can ask and what you can't ask, and what we were trying to get at.
When you ask people questions about religion, If you first ask what religion you follow, you might find one answer, but if you prompt them with alternatives, look, we get mix, you can basically choose more than one, and when you prompt, you get a different set of answers.
You know, very often the man of the household would say, yes, you know, we follow Buddhism, let's say. And we have a very strong thing about we're Buddhist, we do this. And then at the end of the thing, would you mind, do give us permission to see your personal family shrine? I can remember one particular case, and we went around the corner and we saw the shrine, and it was full of Hindu gods. The distinction between public discourse and private practice, between the male sphere of public discourse and the female sphere of actual domestic religious practice, that gap, that tension, became one of the themes of our research.
We organized a findings dissemination workshop where we invited community members, and most of our respondents attended that.
So one of the really nice and gratifying things was that seeing Nepalis learn about their own country, you know, even very educated Nepalis who got PhDs, still had a lot to learn about the cultural diversity in their own country.
What was a surprise, even though you think you're part of the community, when you do research, systematic research with the community people, that some of the findings you get are really surprising.
Do you have a question you'd like to ask Krishna?
Well, I suppose, did you ever imagine that we would still be working together 10 years later? Would be the question. Did that ever enter your mind when the first time you came up to Oxford in 2007?
Do you have a question you'd like to ask David?
I don't know. I've been meeting him almost every day, so for the last 5 years, maybe if I've got any question, I've asked him.
This is a reflection that applies to that project, and it applies to all such big projects, which is that, of course, the funding period comes to an end, but that's often only the beginning of the work. You spend many, many years processing the results, and some of it still hasn't been published. So it's a great privilege to do this kind of research work, but it's also a burden because you feel you have to do justice to the people who were so kind as to talk to you and give you the information.
If you are interested in finding out more about the project, please go to the Common Cause website.